I want to discuss Volodymyr Zelenskyy, the president of Ukraine's most recent interview on 60 Minutes. And to be honest, he's a lot more unfiltered than usual when the subject of Trump and the infiltration of Russian disinformation into not just the United States, but the White House. And J.D. Vance, have you thanked me even once? Mushy, mushy. All of that. So let's look at these clips. And then Trump watched this. He posted about how he watched this and started making threats and being all pouty. So we'll look at his response in just a second here. But first, here is Zelenskyy getting asked about how Trump comes into office. And after Zelenskyy had a real partner in the White House in Biden, it shifted radically to someone who would lie about him and call him things like a dictator, which is obviously detached from reality, as that same guy who shows how strong he is refuses to call the actual dictator a dictator, being himself. I mean, Putin.
Of our people. Those were the points Zelenskyy struggled to make in February as President Trump opened negotiations with Russia and initially excluded Ukraine. Then, Trump rewrote history, saying falsely that Ukraine had started the war and calling the democratically elected Zelenskyy
a dictator without elections. Zelenskyy better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Got to move fast because that war is going in the wrong direction.
When President Trump called you a dictator and said that Ukraine started this war, what did you think?
Я вважаю, що, на жаль, руські наративи
I believe, sadly, Russian narratives are prevailing in the U.S. How is it possible to witness our losses and our suffering, to understand what the Russians are doing, and to still believe that they are not the aggressors, that they did not start this war? This speaks to the enormous influence of Russia's information policy on America.
Let me stop it there and then much more. When we look at, for example, that whole Tenet media scandal, Russia allocates so much resources to just information abroad, right? And it seems sometimes like, what is all this for? They funded this organization that then went on to fund, very likely without the knowledge of these influencers who happen to have Russian-aligned views. And we're talking about tens of millions of dollars, and they're way overpaying these people. And then over here, they have bot campaigns. And then over here, they have funding of RT. And in the moment, you go, what could that possibly do? Who's going to tune into one of those funded sources and think, yeah, this makes sense? But they've been playing a long game. And over the years, now for decades, as this has been engaged in, slowly, because it takes a second for these narratives to grab hold, Russian-aligned lies, I should say, to be more specific, Kremlin-aligned lies, end up taking hold. And there's a huge sector now, especially of the right wing, that just assumes a lot of the Kremlin premises. And that's made its way, as tragic as this is, all the way to the Oval Office.
U.S. politics and U.S. politicians.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now.
And Zelenskyy told us he heard Russia's narrative from Trump officials in that disastrous Oval Office meeting in February.
You're gambling with World War III.
Zelenskyy grew tense as President Trump said both sides were suffering, Ukraine's people and the Russian invasion force. It's a shift in tone, a shift in reality, really, yes, a shift in reality. And I don't want to engage in the altered reality that is being presented to me. First and foremost, we did not launch an attack to start the war. It seems to me that the vice president is somehow justifying Putin's actions. I tried to explain. You can't look for something in the middle. There is an aggressor and there is a victim. The Russians are the aggressor and we are the victim. Vice President Vance suggested that Putin could be trusted And it was Zelensky who was creating a false narrative.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring people, you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President.
Rewatching those moments are crazy. That's one of the more embarrassing. I watched videos on Twitter. That's not what he asked you, JD. And then since that moment, so you heard some of the sort of reminders about what took place there. Since that moment, all of what Zelensky was saying in the Oval Office ended up proving to be the case, right? And so if you're a MAGA out there and you're wondering, wait, there was all this outrage about how Trump and Vance were acting, and Zelensky, he didn't treat Trump was like, and there was all that, but there were also a lot of claims made. Can I go check and see if one of the sides in that argument, really just mainly Trump and Vance berating Zelensky, were correct? Well, you can, because the main thing that set Trump and Vance off was that Zelensky just very respectfully was saying, I want an end to the war, but it can't just be a ceasefire. We need agreements. We could do a ceasefire while we negotiate, but we need agreements from Russia that will facilitate long-standing peace, that will give us some security protections. And if we just do on paper, they agree to end the war, and we have to give up all these defensive positions and make all these defensive concessions, that's just going to lead to further war. And they lost it, and Trump got asked, what if Putin breaks a ceasefire? Don't you kind of have to have more like a peacekeeping force on the ground to ensure this actually happens? And Trump said, what if a bomb drops on your head? Anything can happen, doesn't matter. And now, as the months have progressed, what have we seen? Oh, well, Ukraine unconditionally accepted a ceasefire. Russia didn't. Ukraine is not facilitating further provocation. Russia is. And is striking every day, causing a lot of death. And I haven't seen an acknowledgement of that from Vance with his bombastic and confident, you need to thank us more, and it's you who's withholding peace. There's been no acknowledgement from the people who defended Trump and said he stood up for us, that it's always been, obviously, the defender that's more willing to and is fully willing to accept peace if it means longstanding peace and sovereignty.
Would you invite President Trump to Ukraine?
With pleasure. Please.
This, Zelensky apparently wanted President Trump to hear in English.
We want you to come, and I think to come and to see. You think you understand what's going on here. Okay, we respect your position. You understand. But please, before any kind of decisions, any kind of formats of negotiations, come to see people, civilians, warriors, hospitals, churches, children, destroyed or dead. Come, look, and then let's move with a plan how to finish the war. You will understand with whom you have a deal. You will understand what Putin did, and we will not prepare anything. It will not be theater with preparing actors in the streets and etc. We don't do this. We don't need it. You can go exactly where you want in any city which been under attacks. What I said to them, just to come and to understand.
Right, yeah. And maybe it's time for Trump to do just that. Now, Trump was apparently watching 60 Minutes over the last couple of weeks, and his ire that has been continual towards them as a part of a broader system of targeting. Now we're seeing it with Miles Taylor and Christopher Krebs, two people who dared to speak out against Trump. Now he's literally directing just recently his Department of Justice to investigate them. The dystopian scenario that many people warned of and other people called hyperbolic. And then a lot of media outlets he's targeting. 60 Minutes is one of them. And he posted this after that interview and other things as well. Almost every week, 60 Minutes, which is being sued for billions of dollars for the fraud they committed in the 2024 presidential election with their interview of failed presidential candidate Kamala Harris, mentions the name Trump in a derogatory and defamatory way. But this weekend's broadcast tops them all. They did not, one, but two major stories on Trump, which are kind of the thing right now with all of your insanity. One having to do with Ukraine, which I say is a war that would have never happened if the 2020 election had not been rigged. In other words, if I were president, and the other story was having to do with Greenland, casting our country has led me falsely, inaccurately, and fraudulently. Very strange syntax. I'm so honored to be suing 60 Minutes, CBS Fake News, and Paramount over their fraudulent, beyond recognition reporting. They did everything possible to illegally elect Kamala, including completely and corruptly changing major answers to interview questions. Obviously, that's false, but we continue. Almost everything here has been false. But it just didn't work for them. They are not a news show, but a dishonest political operative simply disguised as news and must be responsible for what they have done and are doing. They should lose their license. Hopefully, the Federal Communications Commission, as headed by its highly respected chairman, Brendan Carr, will impose the maximum fines and punishment, which is substantial for their unlawful and illegal behavior. CBS is out of control at levels never seen before, and they should pay a big price for this. Make America great again. Doesn't stop there, but let's pause. So, again, I don't know how to say it other than the worst prediction, the worst assumptions about what Trump would be in a second term, they're all coming true. And yes, does it kind of make me upset at the people who were going, okay, I say things gonna shut down here. I'll think. Yes, it makes me a little bit upset at the people who were going, I don't think Retribution, I know what he's going to do. Because he's doing it all. He's literally launching criminal investigations into his adversaries, whom I've just mentioned. And then he's getting his FCC to punish, fine, and get off the air outlets when he doesn't like their reporting and he lies about their editing. And then the FCC is more broadly targeting other liberal outlets. So if that... Can you imagine all the people who said, I stand for the First Amendment, which is why I say COVID misinformation. It's like, yeah, you have the right to, but why do you choose to say it, though? That's my question. I'm using my free speech to ask you, why are you crazy? Those people who coined themselves the warriors of free speech. Alex Jones. I'm Alex Jones. I like free speech. That's why I have to sell you supplements. I'm censored. I can't say the things that I'm saying in front of millions of people right now. They won't let me say it, even though I'm saying it and making millions of dollars doing it. But I can't say it in America. We're now Hitler's Germany. Where are they to say this is the opposite of free speech? This is a government targeting outlets when the president doesn't like its coverage. Then, out of insecurity, he says, the war between Russia and Ukraine is Biden's war, not mine. I just got here. Okay. And for 4 years during my term, had no problem in preventing it from happening. President Putin and everyone else respected your president. I had nothing to do with this war, but I'm working diligently to get the death and destruction to stop. If the 2020 presidential election was not rigged, and it was, in so many ways, that horrible war would have never happened. President Zelenskyy and crooked Joe Biden did an absolutely horrible job in allowing this travesty to begin. There were so many ways of preventing it from even starting, but that is the past. Now we have to get it to stop and fast. So sad. So sad. So sad. Let's read one more and then I'll address what he's saying. I just finished watching 60 Minutes, the fake news show that was scandalously responsible for removing a terrible and incompetently delivered answer by failed presidential candidate Kamala Harris to an interview on 60 Minutes just prior to election day and putting it in its place, a completely different answer to a completely different question. Wrong, 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 wrong. In order to make Kamala look coherent. Now tonight, with two separate but highly inaccurate stories about Trump, they're at it again. The people at CBS fake news just don't get it. So all lies there. We've addressed them before. But on the war stopping, when he says that it is Biden's war, an interesting idea would you could also call it Putin's war, the guy continuing it, but whatever. All right, it's Biden's war. He always said two primary things, I remind you, whenever this would come up. He would say it never would have happened, and he'll end it in 24 hours. Those would always come during the campaign right next to each other. And so I do think, as I've mentioned before, if you have a slogan on an issue, right, you got a key response on an issue. They're coming from jails, they're coming from jails, right? That's the border. And then this would be, never would happen. I'll end it in 24 hours. Can we assume the truth value will be equal for the two parts of the same answer he would give? All right. Well, let's remind ourselves how one half of his slogan on that issue turned out.
You said you would have this war settled in 24 hours.
Well, I was being a little bit sarcastic when I said that. I will end that war in one day. It'll take 24 hours. Well, I was being a little bit sarcastic when I said that. Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, I will have the disastrous war between Russia and Ukraine settled. Well, I was being a little bit sarcastic when I said that.
I'll end that war between those two countries in 24 hours. It won't even take that long.
Well, I was being a little bit sarcastic when I said that.
I'll have that done in 24 hours. I'll have it done.
Well, I was being a little bit sarcastic when I said that. It can be negotiated, I think, within 24 hours. Guarantee that this war will end immediately. Well, I was being a little bit sarcastic when I said that. I will have it solved in 24 hours with Zelenskyy and with Putin. And there's a very easy negotiation to take place, but I don't want to tell you what it is because then I can't use that negotiation. It'll never work. Well, I was being a little bit sarcastic when I...
He says he doesn't want to tell you what it is, but every once in a while, I have to remind you the one time that he did let it slip, what the plan was.
I would tell Putin, gotta settle. I would tell Zelenskyy, you gotta settle. I would tell one, you're gonna load up with money. I'd tell the other, you're not gonna get any money. I would get a settlement in 24 hours. Now, it should have never happened.
See? Those answers always. I just don't know. I don't know, I don't know how it didn't work.
I would tell Putin, gotta settle. I would tell Zelenskyy, you gotta settle.
Yeah. So now we can, that whole slogan must have been ridiculous. And again, I circle back to, for all of our new viewers, hello, I love you. Thank you for being here. Our older viewers are very patient with the redundancy that sometimes has to show up so that you all can get all these different things addressed. The whole, I was able to stop it from it's missing history. There's a long playing out, a long plot playing out. And a part of that was the buildup of and the facilitation of aggression, Russian-backed separatists in eastern regions of Ukraine that continued throughout Trump's presidency, ultimately leading, again, as a part of a broader plot here, to the full-scale invasion that now we're experiencing. But he kept saying there was a magic, easy, gotta settle solution. And now he's president. And still, even though you're supposed to say the buck stops with you, he's blaming Sleepy Joe. Share your thoughts in the comments. Support the show. Get the members only bonus show by clicking the join button below.